Substack is a very strangely fickle environment. Some days I'll pop on here and there will be 20 folks that just pile straight in, and some days I pop on and onesies and twosies. You can't predict this stuff. So Josh and John Gordon Pierce have joined today. Well, if you don't know, folks, what I've been doing is I've been going live for about 16, 17 days now. So it's not contiguous. I have had gaps in between. And the aim is really just to develop a familiarity with talking on camera and share my philosophy about stuff. Now, if you follow what I write about and what I talk about, it's hard to track because I'm kind of talking about everything. I'm talking about inspiration. I'm talking about AI. I'm talking about morality. I'm talking about public discourse. I'm talking about discernment. And the reason I'm talking about all these things is I think that the general conversation we have is always too small. So there's always an opinion, let's say, about AI. AI is wonderful. It's amazing. And then the other mob will come along and say, AI is the end, And they'll just deepen into a new faction about anything that happens anything that emerges in our reality. And we do this. We take these polar positions and we don't look for any nuance in it, and we certainly don't look for any transcendent perspectives. I'll give you another example. I encourage people to practice judgment. Why would that sound bad? You have to practice good judgment. And I choose my words carefully when I judge something or if I express my opinion on something. Hey, Zoe, because so often everything that we're doing online as writers here is to express our opinions or our insights or our reflections on something. On an archetypal sense, in a non-literal sense, that takes a thing which archetypally we call judgment. Something has to be weighed, something has to be evaluated. Some decision has to be executed and put out in the world, like some final version, whether it's a judgment of ourselves, a judgment of some occurrence, a judgment of who has done what to whom and what the consequences are. So when I write whatever I write, I'll be expressing my discernment, right? And then people immediately latch onto the idea, who are you to judge? Well, I'm also a person. I'm a sane adult in possession of faculties and agency and some sovereignty and an opinion. I'm not telling everybody mine is the only one or the right one, but this is my contribution to this thing. This is what I have to say. And unfortunately, this is what social media is. And we can't pick and choose who says what to who at what time. But we can start developing some sort of discernment on this. And so often I get a kind of, especially from souls of a certain stripe that were quite captured, let's say, by the woke movement, which had merits and it had problems in its hands, right? Because of precisely this thing that I'm talking about. So someone will say, nobody is better than anybody else. No, perhaps nobody is better than anyone else, sure. But to pass judgment on something, to apply your discernment to something, doesn't require that you be or think that you are better than anything or anyone else. In a village, in a situation where there were people interacting together and somebody did something that there wasn't a social protocol or a rule for, or the society hadn't made up its mind yet as to what to do and what the right thing was, different people would weigh in with their judgments. Right. And then you would take the different points from the crowd, and then each of us would be able to arrive at something. Now, depending on what the momentum of our cultural story and our precedent and our memories and everything hang together like, the village or the crowd or the society would eventually arrive on a thing and say, okay, this is the right thing to do, or this is the wrong thing to do, or these are the circumstances under which something is okay or which is not okay. It's the only way societies can cohere. But at the moment, hey, Patrick, hey, Beeson, Jordan, hey, Jordan, we are so afraid of, being judgmental ourselves. I'm listening to young philosophers, and I mean young of all ages, that are reaching out to me, and we're having these conversations online and offline. And they have to prefix everything that they say with, oh, I don't want to appear as if mine is the only answer, or as if I'm being arrogant, or as if I'm judging people. And I'm like going, my guy, just relax. Just tell me what you think. You're in the company of another adult. We can work it out. Say it badly. Let's just get to the heart of what you're trying to say. How refreshing and meaningful would it be if we were able to actually just speak to each other and say, look, this bothers me. I think that's wrong, without now digressing into this little sideshow about who's trying to be superior to whom. Just let people say what they mean to say, in however they mean to say it. My opinion, my advice on this as a civic philosopher is that judgment is the beginning of discernment. You have to have that interiority inside of you where you make a decision that doesn't subscribe to what the whole mob or the group or your parents or religion or politics or ideology or social media sentiment is telling you to believe. You have to be able to understand and make choices inside of yourself for yourself. Beeson says, I hate when people constantly say the answer is somewhere in the middle. Just state your opinion without fear. Well, yeah, I don't hate it per se. Hey, James, I don't hate it per se, but I find it like effete. We're so afraid of being the tall poppy. We're so afraid of showing anything that doesn't look like lukewarm modesty and piety. And under that shelter of piety and morality and non-judgmentalism, there's sociopaths and narcissists in the world who do not give a fuck. They've got none of our scruples, right? And the systems that we have that lead people, that decide what's going to happen next, they select for such personalities. So, who are making the most noise on the internet? The extremists, the influencers. These are not people that have this innate sense of self-control, right? And now with the signal of someone like Donald Trump echoing out daily with all of the sound bites and the absurdities that come out of such a person's mouth, it's now like a kind of dog whistle to everyone who looks at that example and thinks, oh my God, you can just get away with it. Now they are just getting away with it. And the people with better opinions and better insights and human-centric values, we're all keeping ourselves very careful and editing ourselves and saying everything in such a careful way. We're so fucking lame and so constrained. And then there's this other side of it where, if you're now going to give yourself permission to speak or to judge something, right, you have to give yourself permission to judge something. Where you get your permission is where you get your power, right? So philosophically, if we're all trying to figure out what better ways look like, this is the core of my philosophy. I'll say so often, there's no right ways and there's no only ways. That assumes that all of life or all of choices is like some line graph where there's a low area and there's a peak, and we're all trying to reach towards that peak, and it's just two-dimensional, right? You can go up and down and you can go left or right on that graph. That's so silly, right? It's more like a landscape or a field, and the way I describe it is as a meal. Our philosophy, we should think of our life philosophies and our ideologies and what we think better is for ourselves and society like a landscape, like many peaks and troughs on which you judge something. So if you think of the trolley problem always tries to reduce ethics to like a binary, a yes or a no. There's somebody lying on the tracks, and over there is a man, and over there is a woman, and one of them will be killed by the trolley depending on how you pull the lever, right? There is no right answer to these things because someone then just interjects the next thing. The lady was pregnant. And then everyone will say, okay, don't hit the lady. And then they'll say, she was pregnant with Adolf Hitler. And then the experiment can just keep going forever without a conclusion, because that's not how ethics should work, right? It isn't a binary thing. There's conditions upon conditions upon conditions. And the problem is we're trying to write those conditions into something as simple as an AI algorithm or a software so that there can be this universal understanding of what right and wrong is. There can't be, because reality is always unfolding. Rubico1 joined us. Hello there. Thanks for being here, folks. Today we're talking about transcending the permission of the crowd, and then also finding out what the line or the limit to that is, because we don't want to become one of the sociopaths or the narcissists or the psychopaths that give ourselves this enormous degree of self-permission to say or do whatever we want without like some moderating restraint. So how do we find that moderating restraint? So I'm making cases for how and why to transcend um, uh, the voice of the mob or the voice of the crowd in terms of what's moral, what's appropriate, because we need to start practicing our own discernment here. We need to develop our own form of agency. We need to inoculate ourselves against systems of control that are not just telling us what to think, but the problem is that they're telling us who we are. They're telling us who we are. There is a thing that happens that if you get flashed a piece of news or a fact, even if you know it's not true, if you're not being vigilant and paying attention and presently discerning of that piece of information every time it crosses your path online as a headline, somebody's repeating the same trope in social media on Substack, the brain just starts recording repetition as equal to truth. So if you hear something enough, the brain subconsciously just goes, oh, well, it just keeps coming up. There's some heuristic in human programming that says, see something enough, regard it as real, and then it gets locked in your subconscious. And that means it's changing. It's telling us who we are. It's telling us who we are. The only combat to that is to develop a form of agency and self-awareness, so that you give yourself permission to make such judgment calls. You don't just accept what's coming your way. Now, we've digressed a lot. And where we got to was we're talking about the trolley problem, this wish list that we have to try and dissect ethics and make it very, very simple and say, oh, it's A or B, it's this choice or that choice on these conditions. And my argument is that it's not linear. It's not so two-dimensional. It's multidimensional and multivalent. And the example I gave is of a meal. When we have a meal, it must be something that is non-toxic and not soiled. That's a must. It should be tasty. Doesn't have to be. It could be hot or it could be cold. It should be nutritious. It could be well presented and attractive. Right. There's not one of those things that you would choose and say that's the main one. There are musts, there are shoulds, there are coulds, and there are won'ts. It won't be this. It should be this. It could be that. It must be this. So you still want to hit as many of your musts, but we all have had meals that are not perfect musts, right? So they weren't poisonous, and there was some nutrition, or some, at least it staved off the hunger, or it gave us something, or we just simply enjoyed it because it was tasty, but it was junk food, right? Morality is like that. Ethics is like that. There's not one peak that we want to hit, right? We're trying to hit a balance of as many of the good things as possible while navigating a constantly changing field. I hope that's making sense to everybody. And the only way to do that is to have your own sense of discernment. You can't reference the 10 Commandments every time. You can't reference the morality of the crowd every single time. You can't be so afraid of what the woke mob will say to you and descend on you and start shredding your language apart and projecting and insinuating how you're enabling perpetrators and ignoring victims. It becomes too overwhelming. You can't even think your own thoughts, right? Because in you trying to say your piece or make your sense in the world or contribute to the conversation in whatever way, we're not all culturally disposed to the same crusades and the same concerns and all the rest of it. And that should be okay. That should be okay. Hey, Raj. So what do we do instead? It's not that there should be no morality. It's not that there should be no ethics. It's not that there should be no self-restraint. But if you look critically at our society at the moment, the problem is we don't have more mature ways of applying that self-restraint, of finding a different heuristic. Imagine everybody is running in one system, and we all have slightly different operating systems that we're trying to align to. There's the Christian, Judeo-Christian kind of operating system, which gives you like a framework of moralities. And even amongst those, there's differences, right? There's 150,000 kinds of Christian denominations, right? There's at least 8 different schools of Islam. So which one is right? And then there's differences that people will die on a hill over, right? Then there's all the other isms that we have. And they prescribe, including Marxism and Buddhism and Taoism. And they all have these different downloads of what morality and wisdom and propriety and social coherence and what's right or wrong, what it looks like, right? And then you overlay on top of that Western democracy and humanism and atheism and scientism and reductionism, and then different forms of spirituality. And then you add social justice and identity culture on top of that, and identity politics. And then you add conservative values on top of that. And we're all human beings running around. Good morning, sir. We're all human beings running. I'll read that in a second, James. We're all running around in this little single human platform, trying to marshal our own soul, trying to reach forward and figure out who we are, right? Your who you are always determines your how you go about life and what you're doing and what you prioritize, right? What you're trying to be a part of. And to try and hold all of these moral systems and all of its language policing and all of its implications, there's so many points of reference. It's like we now need to import a committee inside of our psychology and inside of our mind to constantly edit everything that we're saying and everything that we feel. We are not free. We're not free to think. We're not free to speak. We're not free to express ourselves. And that means we're not free to share the gift that we came here to share as artists, as creatives, as writers, as inventors of new ideas, etc. I hope I'm making sense to everyone. James tells us that the world is facing en masse ego power, competitions on one side versus golden rule, generous ethics, adherence to the other. James. Patrick says, I'm interested in the concept of relational becoming. Everything evolves together, and we should always be in conversation with each other, with nature, with technology, our ancestors, without dogma allowed, no authority but the light within us. Patrick, that's it, my guy. But now I want to flip to the other side of it. I want to stand up an argument against that, because yes, all of that is amazing. But what does it take for 9 billion people? And let's say that, half of that is adults, right? Half of that is decision-making adults. If this was the great village of the human family, you can't give agency necessarily, full agency, decision-making agency to children. You can't give it to delinquents. You can't give it to people who are mentally deeply unwell. The problem is we're all a little bit mentally deeply unwell, because it's no sign of good health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society. And a lot of our norms are sick, so we're not thinking clearly. We're not relating to each other clearly. We all have these vestigial marriages to these old isms and these old religions and these old bodies of morality. And then we're operating in systems in corporate, the business world, in politics, in various forms of academic leadership, in social media discourse, in influencer culture. We're rewarding people and elevating people to decisions of leadership and decision-making power, usually who are the most inclined to selfishness, to sociopathy, to doing things for themselves, to being duplicitous, to being prepared to control other people and sell their integrity and their sincerity out. That's what our system selects for. So this is also hugely normalized, right? So in amongst all of us goodwill people, there are people who are invested in projects that are not aligned with human goodwill. And the argument could just as well be, that they're also just dealing with relational becoming, and that the ugliness in the way that we're deploying technology or the way that we're dehumanizing people is just all part of the becoming, and they're just responding to the light within inside of them, and they don't need to get permission from anybody else because they're giving themselves permission. You can see the risk. You can see the risk. So what's the problem? One, what's the solution? The problem is discernment. We need to be able to discern, to judge who is capable of contributing towards such a collaborative project and who is not. And nobody wants to be judgmental of other people. But if you cannot find the wisdom and the necessity of being judgmental of a certain kind of person, you're going to invite the sickness back into whatever utopian ideal we aim to strive towards. You folks, please let me know if I'm making sense. Because this is what philosophy should be about. Yes, it's lovely that we have wisdom from Socrates and from Nietzsche and from Schopenhauer and from Hegel and Albert Camus and Jean-Paul Sartre. And there's so much good stuff. There is so much good stuff. Simone de Beauvoir. There is so much good stuff, right? But that good stuff needs to be analyzed and synthesized and demodulated and applied to our present moment for it to help us. But we have philosophers coming through in the field right now who are tackling with this present unfolding moment with the current challenges we have in slightly new paradigms, in slightly new language that is actually congruent with all that wisdom, right? But it has a skill or a knack of being able to separate itself from all of the cultural husk and the problems of those times. Some of the same problems we're having now, sure, but we're having new kinds of problems, right? And we need to talk to those new kinds of problems today. James, there is honestly no reason to apologize. You're welcome. This is a full agency exercise. You're welcome to come and go as you like. And so, the bulk of my work is lost on too many folks, sadly. And it's that, or the core of my work is lost on too many folks. And it's that I think what we should be thinking about is how to realistically navigate our way forward as a society towards what better might look like. And we need to rethink a few things. And we need to arrive at convergent language. But this is the conversation that I think like really dedicated writers and thinkers and creatives, philosophers and artists should be busying themselves with. Because if we don't get this right, all of the other ideas that we want, all of the other dreams and the visions we have, won't get a chance at living in the world. Because human beings need to be able to agree amongst themselves who is worth listening to, who is worth letting in on the conversation, who is worth excluding and on what basis. But we're not ready, we're not mature enough for that conversation because we're still subscribing to models of morality, models of permission. Just think about what society is. It is the secret software that runs across everything that tells you what right and wrong is, what's permitted and what's allowed, and what better and worse looks like. And it's predicated on the idea that there is always a daddy, always an overlord, always a hierarchical boss, always a voice above which you cannot contravene. And if you try, then you're arrogant. What happens if that voice is wrong? If that voice wasn't wrong, humanity would not have been led to the place that we are at now, right? I'll hear a million arguments. Yes, if everyone was just a Christian, this would be all fine. Yes, to a point. But are you telling me that there's no Christian countries and no Christian communities that get led astray because they all have 150 different thousand interpretations of what the good word meant? Right? Okay, so it can't be that, right? It can't be another daddy download that says everybody has to do this. But that implies something. You still need the adult. So even if it's not an external adult or a virtual adult telling you what to do, right? You still need that adult. Where are we going to find the adult? Each person has to find that adult inside of themselves. Which is why the institution of initiation is so important, because it's that institution of initiation that prepares people, children, young people, adolescents, human beings, prepares them for the inheritance of their own agency, so that they can go through an initiation, so that they can understand what is at stake. If this village or this tribe or this society loses its coherence, if the parts are not compatible with each other, everything becomes harder, and the dissonance that we experience gets pushed down onto the individuals to try and make that thing, that coherence, stay together. And that is the circumstance that we are experiencing in 2026 at the moment. An enormous dissonance that every single person is experiencing. And our old systems of permission and our old narratives are telling us to either go look for who to blame or to make ourselves right with one of these old systems. And if we just give that a proper crack this time now, it will solve everything. But whatever you do, don't judge other people's opinions. Don't be judgmental, lest you be judged. I don't mind being judged, but I want to be judged on superior thinking, on superior standards, on philosophy that has a chance of steering multiple human beings together collaboratively towards a brighter horizon. And we can't do that with the old shit levels of thinking that we were stuck with, and that led us here. Raj says, I concur. Excuse me, the elder learning and teaching are limited in scope to the less learned as far as perception. Raj, this is getting a bit complicated for me. I concur. The elder learning and teachings are limited in scope to the less learned, as far as perception limited as it is to our present interpretations of past civilizations. My man, that is a fortune cookie of wisdom that wraps back on itself, and I'm not following what you're saying. We are at a disadvantage through error of judgment. Yes, hence judgment should be one of oneself, not of one another. Incorrect, according to me, Raj. It should be both. It should be both. You need to be able to discern the motives and intentions and the wisdom and maturity and capability of other people. You need to be able to do that. And you need to be able to discern that within yourself. And it's that calibration with a self, with other, and with the unfolding moment, the unfolding reality. And it's a triangular three-body problem. You have to track all of those things, I believe. Raj says, my punctuation is poor. My apologies. Do you see there, Raj is applying self-discernment and self-judgment. Absolutely, he says. Yeah, so that's basically the thrust of what I'm saying. Now, I realize this has been philosophically technical, but I'm kind of also trying to draw in an audience that can roll with this kind of stuff and finds this interesting and meaningful. And yeah, this is kind of the level that I like to work at. But yeah, I suppose you'll let me know if it's landing or if it's making good sense or not. So what do we do? How do we get there? How do we change? The first thing I would say is like an orientation, a recognition, a waking up to the reality of where you are. That's happening. People are awakening, we can say. And what worries me is what they're awakening into. Imagine you were a soul or arriving at the event horizon, this unfolding threshold of right now. Right. There is a process and a protocol that we treat babies with, new souls. First of all, their senses are overwhelmed. They're in a body for the first time. They're dealing with stimulus and feedback and emergencies which didn't exist before, and they haven't got any frame of reference for what's going on. That is something that will arrive over time. The sense of self will arrive over time. The senses will arrive over time. The ability to construct a predictive model of the world and to navigate it so that you're not constantly afraid and traumatized and terrorized, so that you can start predicting what's going to happen, so that you can start doing things in order to get your needs met. Right? Just consider what that welcoming process would need to look like. It would need to be mostly nurture, mostly comfort, mostly welcome, right? And then a slow induction into ideas and into how to look after one's own agency, how not to burn too bright, how not to burn too small, how to find one's voice, how to find one's regulation of one's voice so that we can also be part of the unfolding conversation. To take on ideas of the world without shutting out your own joy and your own wonder. It's such a delicate act, right? Now imagine getting fucking airdropped into 2026. You arrive as a young adult on the scene. Your initiation into society is via social media, whichever fucking dank subreddit or horrid comment section of YouTube you got this education from, with your normalization of reality TV and influencer culture and OnlyFans and the dating scene and the fact that no one can afford a house and the fact that healthcare is poison and the fact that food is is not medicine and the list just goes on and on and on and on and on. Right. We've made it so bad that any young person who is searching for their own sanity and their own wellness and their own soul and their own dignity is going to have to reject all of the norms that we've said, no, do this, get a degree, go to school for 12 years and then get a college degree that means fuck all to anybody, right? And even if it means something, like AI is going to take our jobs and the teachers are not facing that reality and it's all a bit of a mess. And I remember from 27 years in corporate, excuse me, in the corporate world, what happens is you go for an interview and you're all bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and people are smiling and telling you about the vision and the culture and how they're all a big family. And it takes a few months, right, before you realize that it was all fucking bullshit. And then you suddenly realize that all the people that sat in the interview with you, you start recognizing a look about them because you sit in the next interview with them as well. And you know that the day-to-day experiences that they're having are are cynical. They're not being held by the system. They're being let down. They're being pushed around and abused in some psychological sense by the management, who are always sociopaths, always people with no leadership skills, right? 27 years of experience led me to this insight. And yet when the next interviewee comes through, they all put on this fucking emperor's new clothes, this pretend act, and tell this young person some new flavor of bullshit, and then you're expected to also be complicit in the bullshit. That's how the worst of Christianity indoctrinates people. That's how cults behave, right? And then if you dissent against that, you're a tall poppy or a dissenter or a disruptor or you're antisocial or you're just, you're disruptive. There's always some fucking label for people like that. So what you have to do to stay in the in-group and to get your pay and to stay safe, yeah, so that you can be part of the sick system, you have to be sick along with everyone else. And you have to induce other people into that sickness. And now our only argument to that is the worst argument. People who want to tear everything down, who want everyone to burn in hell. So we don't even have any adult responses to adult problems, right? We just throw more fuel on every single fire. Patrick says, I'm sorry for popping in and out. I'm losing connection. Great discussion. I understand what you're saying, but I'm careful to judge because I know that I know nothing. That's wrong, because knowing that you know nothing is knowing something. And it's a judgment call. It's a judgment call about your own discernment. So there's a paradox in there, Patrick. I tried to judge with humor. Yeah, that just means you're trying to soften the blow and you're not facing the reality that you need to develop your own source of agency. And with a good heart, you can only develop agency if you start doing deep inner reflection and inner work and breaking through the programming that you've inherited that is keeping you small, that is keeping all of us small. I have wonderful debates with my kids, but if I were too judgmental, it would push them away. We're talking about two different kinds of judgment. It is good judgment to moderate your language and your reaction to your children for fear of projecting your opinions and beliefs over their experience. So that is a different kind of judgment. And it's all of that I'm talking about. Raj says we cannot change what is in place. Rather, we create what is required at the time, as our lives are dynamic by its nature. There is an argument to that. If we know that life is incremental, people talk about being afraid of going back in time, Raj. Raj says, we cannot change what is in place. Rather, we can create what is required at the time, as our lives are dynamic by its nature. Aha. But if we're not Epimethean and Promethean, if we're not considering backwards, reflecting, and projecting our assumptions forward, if we're not doing that, we're missing something, right? If we know that our life is incremental, it means day by day we're becoming something. We're afraid of going back in time, Raj, and changing something in the past that will make a profound difference in the present moment. But we're not thinking about the incredible power we have to change something in the present with the express intention to shape the reality that we wake up to tomorrow. So we can still shape the reality that unfolds. Yeah. Not all of it, but some of it. Zoe says, this sounds like the intro to the essay I've been working on and I love it. Let's talk, Zoe. Let's talk. Beeson says it's a crazy way to put it. A person coming out of age today has literally to throw away everything we've ever called normal: healthcare, politics, food, the pursuit of dating, finding a partner, college, the property of ownership. It's an entirely new world. And it's, in a sense, it's necessary that all of that old world collapses and breaks. But we need to be so careful about the headlong rush to just tear it all down because we haven't got a plan B to step into. Beeson, this is what I'm talking about, my man. So let's say, for example, we realize that the old system is sick and we're talking about a system in a work or in a project. We've got all these different components that work together, but all in all, the culture is fucked, right? So one thing we can do is we can just delete all the code, unplug the servers, and let the whole thing crash. The problem is, whatever coherence is still left, social media, the same language, some normative Western values, the ideal, at least, of Western democracy, the idea that people have a voice, the idea that you should be able to elect people, or you don't want anyone becoming a doctor. You want someone who wants to be a doctor and has a vocation of healing and helping people. That's the person you want as a doctor. There is some discernment and elevation and election process that still needs to happen to get the right kinds of people vocationally involved in the right kinds of solutions. Somebody picks up our trash. There is a system that governments and whatever organize to take sewage away and process it and bring water to our houses and stock food in supermarkets. Yes, the supermarkets are fucked, but what are you going to do? Rip them all away and let people starve to death for 6 months while we figure out how to grow co-ops in our communities? No one's thinking about the bridge, the transition. They just have these brain fart ideas. That's it. We just need anarchy. Whoa. You need to qualify what you mean by anarchy, and you need to tell me how you're going to elevate the bulk of 5 billion people to a state of psychological and spiritual maturity and adulthood whereby they can actually backfill all of that say-so and coherence and collaboration and decision-making that is going to evaporate when you turn the bad system off, right? We need to find more intelligent ways. Raj says, I concur. Elder learnings and teachings are limited in scope to the less learned only so far as our limited perception allows. Errors of judgment are not to be judged as good or bad, only as errors. That's a very, very wise way of putting it, Raj, because if we treat all of this as bugs in the software, we wouldn't care about who to blame. We would just care about ironing out the bugs. Beeson says there can be judgment and or disagreement as long as it's in good faith. I'm only qualifying good faith judgment. That's the only thing I'm advocating for. Anything done in bad faith, does anyone on the call or anyone of sane mind say, I want to make room for bad faith argument or bad faith judgment? That has to be an assumption. To be a member of the club or a member of the society, you have to want to belong, which means you have to care, also care, and be complicit in its mutual reciprocity and its coherence and its togetherness and its functioning and compatibility. And that can only happen if you're earnestly there for the right reasons. And so what we need to weed out through judgment and discernment are people and motives who are not here for the right reason. There is a prevailing thought in our world today that is normal. That's just how business is done. And that normal idea says the person who is the smartest, The winner of this game is the one who can take the most out of a system while giving the least amount back. Okay, that whole idea is fucked. And that's the actual idea we should be arguing about. But you can't qualify what's good or bad, what's in or out, without developing the muscle and the agency inside of yourself to practice discernment and to stand behind that. Otherwise, it's all just bluster. Raj says, I see what you mean. Agreed. Nature is coherent. Our perceptions, then our action could be erroneous without realizing. Yes. And that's the part that I actually want to get to, is how does one then have this aim of giving yourself permission, developing your own agency, my own say-so, my own form of permission in this world, my way of experiencing something without this imposed committee of jabbering adults and gatekeepers and all the rest of it. How do I do that, but not overshoot and enter into some form of delusional agency or delusional self-permission, which many people are subject to? A lot of the argument energy on social media comes from people who have an enormous conviction that they're right, based on what Dunning-Kruger would have called the Dunning-Kruger effect. They just don't know enough about what they think they know. And when you don't know enough, your degree of certainty can be very high because you're dealing with things in a very, very simplistic heuristic or a twisted experience. Cynthia joined. Nice to have you here, Cynthia. Raj says, good faith is not malicious by its nature. Only errors of judgment occur which can be easily rectified. Raj is running a bit of software here which says if you can think about everything in terms of if you can take morality out of it, you can still get better and worse just by looking at the code line of what makes up decisions or motives and extrapolate that against outcomes that you can expect to receive. It's like looking at an Excel spreadsheet. There'll be something in there that's not telling the story that we mean it to tell. That doesn't mean it's good or bad. It means it's an error. And the error needs to be stepped through until we encounter what is this piece of code doing? What did we want it to do? It's not doing what we wanted it to do. Maybe what we wanted is impossible or simplistic, and then we have to deepen that or expand that out. That's what stepping through looks like, yeah. Cynthia says, hi, thank you. Yeah, so how do we do that next thing? How do we, cheers, Raj, how do we develop that tension that, yes, I give myself permission. Yes, I'm not a product of systems or philosophies of control that are telling me who I am. I'm on a journey to discover who I am myself. But in that, I'm also taking steps both boldly and carefully. So I'm courageously taking steps deeper towards my own self-agency, but I'm also practicing that hand of parenting and guidance and leadership and restraint on myself so that I don't overreach. The thing is, it's a very hard project to do. You can understand the impossibility. On what basis do I give myself permission? That's the question. On what basis do I give myself permission to decide what I know is better or more true for me than anybody else? Because if you get that wrong, you're a sociopath, yeah, or a narcissist. So how do I not get it wrong? I'll give you a quick hint. Sociopaths and narcissists are not worried about being sociopaths and narcissists. They're worried about being caught. Okay. If you're not worried about being caught, and if you're worried about the thing, you're automatically okay. Right. But that still means you need to develop some kind of protocol as to how to go about doing that safely. And lots of people have lots of different answers. And some of those wonderful answers lead you back into systems of permission again. They do not lead you into a system of constraint or governance or progress that has an infinite trajectory, that is transcendent, that can guide you to as deep as you want to go, as high as you want to go. We do not have clear thinking collectively on what such systems look like. So we first have to start recognizing What does good and bad advice look like? And I've spent some time thinking about this, as you can tell. My advice is this. At the end of the day, we are all here to have our own experience. Even though we have shared experiences, there is something unique that is happening for me based on the way I came into the world, based on the way my ears and eyes work, based on the way my brain is wired. Some of that is based on the life that I've lived. Some of that is based on the choices that I've made. Some of that is based on choices that have been made for me. Some of that is how present I am, right? So I need to now figure out what I can control and what I can't control, what I can know and what I can't know, right? And I also have to understand that my current limits are not my permanent limitations. And that whatever I think is true today, that can all change in some sense tomorrow, right? As soon as Copernicus came along and pointed out that the sun was the center of the solar system, nothing changed and everything changed, right? Paradigms work like that. Our narratives and our stories define how we belong to life, who we are in relation to what's unfolding around us. And for each of us, that is we need to find a personal anchor point, a personal point of reference that is not derived or it doesn't originate from outside in the world, that originates inside of us. So that's about self-discovery, right? Ancient people had language for that. They called it the soul, right? And it's not that you immediately get full access to your whole blossomed soul. It's like a calling that is nagging inside of you. And that calling is stifled by the way that the modern world is shaped, and we have helped shape. So someone like Ian McGilchrist, he wrote a very seminal work called The Master and His Emissary, which is about how the different hemispheres of our brain in every single human being are responsible for two sub-persona. The one persona is the left brain. It's egocentric. I, me. It sees everything else as an object, yeah? And it sees itself as the main actor, and everything else is just everything else, right? On the right-hand side, that's the part of us that's aware of myth and symbolism and relationship and contingency, right? In ancient cultures, the right brain, the mythic self, the I'm part of the great unfolding story. I'm part of place. I'm initiated into place. I know the relevance of my ancestors. I know the relevance of the ones who will come after me, right? I'm part of something. That's a healthy, normative way of moving through the world that doesn't remove your sense of self. It positions it, right, differently. That should be the master, and the clever left brain should be the servant to that master, and then our life can move forward powerfully, right? But we've got it exactly the other way around. Exactly the other way around. And the problem is the right brain, if it's healthy and in charge, knows how to keep the left brain healthy and moderated and regulated and in good service to the whole, the ecology, the tribe, the all. But when you swap it around, the left brain doesn't have that at all. It becomes like it believes it is the master, and it believes that the evil that it's creating is a good thing. And for it only understands languages other than love. So it's good at precision, it's good at logic, it's good at reasoning, and eventually it creates an illness for itself. It's a neurotic thing. The left brain, the monkey mind, the chatterer, the warrior, the problem, the critic, right, the victim. It creates a circumstance for itself through its reductionist, cold interfaces, its cold processes. Everything loses that sense of the essential and that sense of meaning. And then it doesn't just dominate the right brain. That illness that it creates a kind of dungeon in which it imprisons and tortures its cure, which is our sense of soul, our sense of meaning, our sense of belonging, right? And that's what we're all suffering with. People are experiencing meaninglessness. That's a loss of soul. They're experiencing overwhelm. Overwhelm is when there's too much detail and too much chatter and too much logic and too much stuff. And then to try and sort the stuff out, the left brain wants to put analysis on the stuff and diagnose the stuff and argue about the stuff and push out more stuff to make sense of the more stuff. Right? It's like trying to clean yourself off of mud with more mud. Right? It's only ever going to get worse. And instead, what we need to do is we need to reignite that mythic sense of self again, because there is a myth, a gift, a journey awaiting each of us, and collectively as a whole, which can only begin in earnest once we restore that balance, right? So that beginning of a soul journey and a soul encounter needs to happen. When that is healed and you are in contact with that and you're deepening your intimacy and your conversation and your relationship with that aspect of yourself, right? Everything follows, because that is heart aligned. That is in the service of life. That is in the service of coherence and emergence and meaning, right? There will still be clashes with reality and clashes with the moment and clashes with other people while we all figure it out in the process. But it won't be this corrosive and this manic. Yeah. And there's ways to do that, right? You have to upgrade your archetypal language. You have to upgrade your archetypal language so that you can be fluent in this language of the soul, so that you can start having a conversation from the level of soul with the unfolding moment. If you take a look at the world today, you can make more sense of all of that complexity through the lens of mythos and myth and archetype than you can through all the reductionist science, all the political theory, all of the anthropology, all of the social dynamics. All of that is just more jibber jabber that you can explain so simply through the lens of myth. And when you understand that explanation through the lens of myth, you can connect again to place and to story and to this journey and to what meaning looks like for you. Yeah. Gary says, hello. Raj says, clear fact in matter to hand does not require permission, only action. We're getting a little bit technical, but you're right, Raj. Patrick tells us, I did a few podcasts here on Substack, but then took them down. Not sure if it's because I'm a sociopath or a narcissist. I don't know. I don't know what the topic of your podcast was, Patrick. But anyway, folks, what am I talking about? I'm talking about the need for us to transcend systems of permission and control that are fundamentally not leading us forward into happy places. And then the treacherous ground that's so well described in myth about leaving the village or leaving the sick kingdom and then having to cross the chasm or the ocean or the desert or whatever it is to go on a quest to find the secret thing, right? To discover again who we are, right? To have these surprising discoveries happen to us so that all these faculties that we receive eventually can be governed first and foremost by the human heart, so that everything that we do is in the service of goodwill, or of good faith. That's the actual project. And without that project, spirituality is meaningless. Philosophy can become meaningless. Any form of social coherence can build into it the seeds of its own unhappiness and future demise. Because something needs to be soul-led, or else, I say, soul is what is missing when life feels wrong. That capacity, that mythopoetic capacity, that sense of self that is integrative with the rest of the world. If that's missing, what is the point to any of this? What is the point to any of this? If we don't cherish meaning above all things, what are we cherishing? I often say you get to the end of your life. You get to the end of your life or the end of a cycle, and there's a kind of reckoning that needs to happen, a bookkeeping, a keeping of a journal and of a ledger. And what you do is you look back and you ask yourself, if I had my time again, what would I keep doing? What would I stop doing? And what would I start doing? Socrates said that the unexamined life is not worth living, but we never get taught what to examine. And what we're supposed to examine is our own quality of choices. Our own investments of energy and attention. And we get to the end of that and we look at certain things and we say, this was an injury to my soul. This was a missed opportunity. I played small. I invested my energy in the wrong things. I didn't grow. I wasn't bold enough. I didn't do things my way. I let my light go out. We can call that regret. I caused harm that I'm ashamed of. I caused harm to other people that I'm ashamed of, regardless of what permission I had or what morality said. I caused harm to myself or to others or to opportunity or to the world. Maybe by not letting my light shine, maybe by not cultivating my gifts. Yeah. And this isn't about duty. This is about personal fulfillment. And then the other column, in all of those reflections that we have at the end of a life, we can put in the regret column. And then when we ask those same questions, if I had my time again, what would I keep? What would I stop? What would I start? What am I proud of? What were my wins? What were my triumphs? What am I so grateful for? What am I so proud of myself for? Not because of the light it gave me by other people's validation, but because I feel that was a life well lived. I was glad I gave in that way, or I held space for somebody in that way, or I was of service to another person's soul in some way, in a way that meant something both profoundly to me and to them. That we can put in the meaning column. And what we want to do is we want to reach the end of any moment of evaluation, of assessment, a judgment moment, the great judgment moment, right? Where the meaning column exceeds the regret column. And the only way to do that is to pursue meaning, is to stand at the fulcrum of every single difficult choice, saying, I don't know the whole answer, but what does love look like right now? What does love look like to me right now? And it's not always the same thing. Sometimes it's keeping quiet, sometimes it's speaking up. Sometimes it's restraint, sometimes it's boldness. And the other question is my help helping? Is my help helping? I'm trying to help you, but is it really helping? And I have to ask myself some tough questions sometimes. And the other one is, what would the better version of myself do? Is my help helping? What does love look like right now? I've got these wonderful questions that I sit with all the time, that anyone can sit with. You don't have to be right. You just have to be honest. Because if you're honest that you are coming from love, what is most beautiful to my soul? Would it be doing this or doing that? Or is it something else altogether? If you live with such questions and you make that the heart of your decision-making heuristic, even if you speak to somebody online, that doesn't mean you can't go take it back and say, I'm sorry, I didn't mean that. I was coming off wrong. I don't want to be like that anymore. You can just shape that. You can do redos, right? Mistakes are how we learn, right? So it's not that you're not going to make mistakes, you're not going to have some regrets, but you're not going to get to the end of it. I'm not going to get to the end of my life or a time with my daughter or a meal with my family where I go, oh my God, I thought I knew what love looked like, but I was such an idiot and I did all of this. I feel those feelings, but then there's another one inside of me, the wise one that's growing up, that's parenting me through all of this uncertainty, saying, what would you expect from other people? All people can do is what they think love looks like in this moment right now. And then when they learn from a mistake, they learn from a mistake. If we can all allow that in each other, this will become so much easier, friends. This will become so much easier. But we're not even really on that self-parenting journey, that self-initiation journey, that journey of soul initiation. We're not on that journey yet. And I suppose what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to encourage people of the absolute necessity to cut out all the jibber jabber online and go and find the poets and the writers and the speakers who are saying resonant things to this. I might not be the guy for you, but I promise you the right person for you that's going to help you contextualize your journey and give you these tools and these frameworks are going to sound of a piece with this. There's going to be resonance to it. Because it's the way that human beings have operated for tens of thousands of years before we invented this broken modernity. That doesn't mean we want to throw modernity away. It means we need to heal our modernity. We don't need no politics. We need better politics. We don't need no science and no technology or no AI. We need the better of such things. And the better of such things will only happen when humans use their voices and demand that it happens. And they will only do that when they are leading themselves from a place of love and a place of agency, right? And are prepared to let go of the floaty ring of group permission and systems of morality and so on. Patrick, you must tell me what you meant by that. Whether you're a sociopath or a narcissist, I don't know what the context was, my guy. Raj says, very profound and spot on, Rocker. Each experience of each conscious human being is a journey that requires only the one, that being you, and the one off never to be repeated entity to experience and recall for one's learning. My seniors told me when I was a kid, expect nothing and receive everything. 60 years later, I comprehend now what was said then. Good. Patrick says the podcasts were about esoteric subjects, and I'm not an expert, but I enjoy being a mediator and exploring new things. I don't know why you would take them down. If you've grown, you can leave them there as proof to everybody and yourself how much you've grown. If something was wrong, you can correct it. It's an artifact of your journey. I wouldn't take it down. Put them back up, but record a preamble and explain where you were in your journey and what it stands for and what you'd correct, and then post them again. Jerry says, I'll say you have been very helpful for me, but it may not look like it because I tend to sit with input and process and integrate, and I'm very purposeful in how I move through the world, as we should all be. And Patrick says, yes, that's true. I can do that. Yes, we can all do that. Folks, if this moved you, if this touched you, if this influenced you, if this gave you a thread of self-permission or a vector of hope or an idea of what to do next or a invitation deeper into your own journeys, please let me know. Just push the love heart because the 11 of us here, if everybody votes with their finger, it's a casting vote for the kind of people who will encounter this next time. And maybe somebody else, their life can be changed through these insights. I'd like that. Do I want to be an influencer? Hell yes. Do I want to be an influencer the way we call influencers at the moment? Absolutely not. But this is the kind of influence we want to be and give and share and participate in, because functional human societies, functional relationships influence each other positively. Even in difficult ways, but it's always net positive. It's always what love looks like. It's always what is most beautiful to our souls. Yeah. So, like my work, comment, share, subscribe, do what you got to do. But thank you very much for your company today, folks. Yeah, for you, maybe Raj, but for me, man, I'm trying to get a message out in the world. So effort is required. I can't rest on the joy of wu wei. Yeah, I got to do the other thing. All right, folks. Thank you very much. Have a lovely evening. Why is it so dark in here? Strange. Take care.